Very, very quick rundown. Very quick rundown of Lance. You've got two main basic attacks, which is your bread and butter. The most commonly used things are going to be your Y attack, mid thrust, and B attack, high thrust. High thrust 1 and 2 do like 10% more raw, 5% more raw than mid thrust. So if you can hit with both attacks, you should always use high thrust. But if you can't hit with both attacks, use whichever one will connect with the target. If the target's up high, use mid thrust. If the target's down low, like on the ground, you might want to use mid thrust to ensure you connect as opposed to missing. The third attack in the combo, high thrust 3 and mid thrust 3, do the same amount of damage. So those ones, the third hit in the combo, you can use interchangeably. You basically almost never want to use wide sweep. This attack is kind of shit. Wide sweep is kind of bad, so you don't really want to use it. It has a higher animation commitment. Doesn't do much that much more damage compared to the other ones. You see high thrust, when high thrust crits, it's 175, 143. This does 143, and a critting wide sweep is 130. So high thrust does more damage. The only time you'll use it is if you want to hit multiple targets, like small monsters, or if for whatever reason the monster's like moving away from you or turning around or something. But anyway. For guarding, right trigger to guard. This just holds a normal guard stance. When something hits your shield while you're doing a normal guard, it will use stamina, and it will knock you back and deal damage. So there's three things. It'll deal damage to you, it'll possibly knock you back, and it will consume some amount of stamina. The more levels of guard you have, the more those things get reduced. Having more points in the guard skill reduces the amount of stamina required to block an attack. It reduces the amount of knockback you take, and it can reduce the amount of damage you receive. There's something called counter thrust, which is right trigger B. I mentioned this already. You'll enter a special stance. If an enemy, if a monster hits you from the direction you're guarding, you will automatically attack. The amount of knockback that you receive when you perform this move can delay the counterattack. The amount of knockback you receive when performing this move can delay how quickly the counterattack is performed. So against a really high knockback move like Fatalis' straightforward breath, there's a pretty big knockback. It takes like half a second to launch the attack. You can enter Power Guard from this stance by pressing right trigger B to enter the counter stance, and then press A to enter Power Guard. When you're in Power Guard, it drains your stamina repeatedly, drains your stamina constantly, but the difference is that a normal guard consumes stamina for each hit you block. A power guard stops consuming stamina when you get hit. So, provided you don't receive enough recoil to break this stance, there are a very few number of attacks that can actually break the power guard stance if you don't have enough levels of guard. But if you get attacked while you're using power guard, your stamina drain gets blocked. So you can block things with very low stamina if you're very quick at doing it. And you can block multiple enemy attacks without triggering your counter attack. So if you perform this counter thrust, right, remember, if you perform this counter, when something hits me, I'm going to automatically attack. I can't stop that attack. So if a monster is going to use a multi-hit ability, if a monster is going to use a multi-hit attack, I want to cancel into a power guard. That way I can block the multiple hits. Best way to deal with Shara's front air attack. If you're talking about the Kamehameha, turn to the side. You do not need to be facing Shara Ishvalda head on to block the Kamehameha laser, the big laser attack. And if you sort of turn slightly to the side, you'll eventually get pushed out of it. So, again, because this attack will activate automatically the counter attack when you take a multi-hit, if you recognize you're going to get a multi-hit, you want to cancel into a power guard. Power guard is also useful because you can exit power guard with what's called the counter thrust again, and it does slightly more damage than a regular attack. It takes does slightly more damage than a regular attack, and you can turn 360 degrees with counter thrust. You can turn 360 degrees with counter thrust, so if for whatever reason you end up, maybe from attacking or something, you end up where the portion of the monster you want to hit is behind you, you can turn around using counter thrust. I will explain normal guard in a second, the differences. Can you exit power guard into normal guard? No. When you do... If you look in the top right-hand corner, you can see the different action... Oh, you can't see the top right-hand corner. Keck. If you look in the top right-hand corner, you can see the different actions you can take when you perform certain moves. You can enable this in the options menu. Something to do with, like, the button display. Button guide. In the HUD display, you can turn the button guide off and on. When you do power guard, there's 3 different things you can do. You can counter thrust. You can dash attack. Or you can leaping thrust. Those are the only things you can do. You cannot exit into a basic guard. So if you power guard and realize, oh, the monster's not attacking me, you can leaping thrust. Leaping thrust, you can turn as well. Leaping thrust, you can do 360. Just like the counter thrust, but the dash attack, you cannot do 360. Right. If it's not obvious, what I mean by 360 is when you exit power guard with either counter thrust or dash attack, you can turn around 360. But you cannot do that with dash attack. Dash attack will always go straight forward. If you want to just exit without attacking, your only option is just release right trigger and stand up. You just release right trigger and you'll stand up. That's kind of time consuming though. So it depends on the situation. Important difference between regular guard and power guard. Is it faster to release and normal guard? Not really. I think you'd probably be better off dash attacking than, or leaping thrust, and then, either leaping thrust or dash attack into a guard dash. Like, you can do this. Dash attack into guard. They're about the same time. Same amount of time. Important difference between power guard and regular guard is the stamina differences that I just mentioned. When you're using power guard, when you get hit while using power guard, your stamina drain drops, and you do not lose stamina from the hit. So you can block any blockable attack, regardless of how much stamina you have, with power guard. Right? You can have as low stamina as possible and still block. Whereas with a regular guard, you need to have enough stamina to block the attack. The other difference is the amount of damage you take. You actually take more damage. You take more damage in power guard. So I mentioned that power guard is good for blocking multi-hits, which is partially true, but you also take more damage rather than a regular guard. So regular guarding, you'll take the least amount of chip damage per hit, but the power guard gives you a more offensive option. Because when you're regular guarding, you might consume more stamina. There's a risk your guard will break because your stamina runs out, and you won't have an offensive option after getting hit. But you take less damage from just a basic guard. You already know about counter claw, which is right trigger left. You can go left trigger B to use counter claw. There's another way you can do counter claw, which is right trigger B left trigger. You can do left trigger B into counter claw, or you can do right trigger B left trigger. Because you'll notice here that I don't have to like put my weapon away and enter this counter claw stance. So you can just do right trigger B, left trigger. I did fix the sound alerts issue, Cribs. Although technically I didn't fix it. It was an issue with sound alerts and Twitch itself. But we did get it straightened out. Sound alerts are now working. The other thing is that Power Guard has a little bit less knockback than regular guard. So an example is, like maybe seen this on stream, is Fatalis's downward breath is 8 hits if you stand in it. A regular guard, you'll get knocked out of the breath after like 3 or 4 hits. But if you Power Guard, you'll stay put. So there's less knockback on Power Guard. So you can stay closer to the monster if the monster is stationary and pushing you away. The next thing about Lance is guard dashing. If you hold either after an attack or when you're holding guard, you can do what's called a guard dash. So commonly you might attack and then right trigger Y with a direction. So it's a directional input. It's a directional input while holding your guard key. So after an attack, right trigger, Y, and a direction, you can guard dash. You can guard dash left and right. You can guard dash backwards. You can guard dash forwards. So you can use this to safely gap close or reposition towards a monster's vulnerable point. And then you've got a couple different actions you can do after a guard dash. One is leaping thrust. One is the shield attack. So you can like chase a monster with a guard dash through an attack and then leaping thrust to close the gap further. Or you can guard dash, shield bash into your combo. And you can adjust your direction left, right. When you'll notice that my character is fixed when I dash left and right. You'll notice that my camera's facing forward when I do this. But if you don't do it after an attack, and you just press right trigger Y, your character will turn in the direction that you move your control stick. So you can dash in a particular direction and face that direction just from a neutral guard stance. If you want to dash and keep your character fixed, you do right trigger and then left trigger. You'll notice my camera zooms in a little bit. You can see this camera zooming in. This is when I'm holding left trigger. So right trigger to guard, left trigger, this fixes your camera, and now you can dash while keeping your character's facing fixed. You can dash while keeping your character looking the same way. This is a bit of a more complicated and technical thing to do. If you don't have time to attack first to fix your character's directional facing, right? If you attack first, your character's direction that they're facing is fixed. But if you don't attack first, then you do right trigger, left trigger, and then the direction is fixed. Yeah. When you perform the counter claw, this counter claw attack, When a monster hits you, you'll automatically clutch claw them, and you have hyper armor during that, which means for 2 seconds, it's very short, but for 2 seconds after you actually initiate the flying through the air claw thing, you will not be knocked off, so you can counter claw and tenderize in situations where other weapons would not be able to, because you have hyper armor, meaning you take reduced damage and you don't get knocked off. That's good and bad, by the way. And then, for some reason, this is something I only noticed yesterday, or the day before. This guard shot stance, the left trigger guarding pose, this actually takes less knockback than a regular guard. I only noticed this yesterday. So your normal right guard allows you to counter. You can enter the counter stance, and it's like your main attack. But if you switch to the guard shot stance, you actually take less knockback when you're in this stance as well. I haven't yet thought of a time where I would want to use this, but yeah. The next thing with Lance is, this is the left trigger guard. The guard shot stance. This is left trigger guard, and you can Slinger Burst from this. Slinger Burst is a close range slinger attack that uses 1 piece of ammo but deals more damage than a typical slinger attack. So typically you'd use that with like a Thorn Pod or a Pierce Pod to interrupt a monster attack. Next thing is just back hops. You can use back hops to reposition or iframe. And after an attack or after another hop, if you do backwards on your control stick and jump again. So I'm just pressing A and then backwards A and backwards A. You do a larger jump. You cannot chain 2 of the large jumps back to back. So you have to do an action in between. But you can do a bunch of small jumps, as many small jumps as you want. But if you want to do the large jump, it has to be separated by some other action. Those have normal iframes and can be affected by Evade Extender. So you can back up really far if you want. And then your main sort of gameplay loop is gap close with whatever tools you need. Whatever tools you have access to. Gap close to the monster. Poke him when it's safe to do so. And counter when attacks are coming your way. And you can use hops to either iframe or reposition as needed. And your combos are always going to be in 3s. Your thrust combos are going to be in 3s. And you want to interrupt during like monster downs and stuff where you're trying to get as much damage as possible. You'll either want to interrupt with a cancel thrust. Cancel thrust is right trigger B and then immediately release right trigger. So right trigger B to enter the counter animation, and then immediately release right trigger. And you'll perform what's called the cancel thrust. So you can use cancel thrust or back hop. Triple combo, back hop, triple combo, cancel thrust, triple combo, back hop, etc. You'll notice that the cancel thrust doesn't move you as much. So you want to mix and match with whatever one you're using. If you're playing solo and the monster's toppled, the DPS combo is cancel thrust into dash attack, finishing thrust. So finishing thrust is just the immediate attack. Dash attack is right trigger Y and B at the same time. Right trigger Y, B. And then you just immediately finishing thrust. And then you can turn around, go left and right while dashing. And you can enter guard from the dash attack as well. This uses stamina as you travel, and the further you go, you get, there's 3 levels of damage and speed. Indicated by the little glow on your character. This attack eats through sharpness. And this attack is a nuisance in multiplayer. So be very careful using this attack in multiplayer. The reason why it's a nuisance, even though there's a skill called flinch free, this attack will still trip teammates even if they have flinch free. So it can be a bit of a nuisance in multiplayer. Sometimes if I'm playing with a bunch of Lancers, I will actually put flinch free 3 on my gear. Is that by design? I mean, in my opinion, it's a poor choice, but yes, the game designers made it that way. I don't know why, but they made it that way. When you're using dash attack, you can jump to perform an aerial. As you're running, you just press A, forward A, and you do advancing jump, and you can perform mounting attacks from this. Lance is one of the 3 weapons I think of that can get aerial whenever it wants. Yeah, as you're charging with the dash attack, forward A, you'll jump. And you can do aerial attacks, or you can just jump over things. So if there's like a ledge you don't want to walk up, you can jump over the ledge. Jump over the ledge, jump over a monster part in order to pass by bad hit zones. Do you use this often to mount? I don't use it often, no. There are some monsters where you can use it. And then you can just jump and do nothing, right? Jump hands off your controller, and you'll do a couple hits as you continue moving, or you can jump and use an attack, and you can turn the direction of this aerial attack in case you sort of run past what you want to hit. And you can use this to mount. So Lance is very effective at mounting, but I don't use it to mount very often. Mostly because mounting itself is a pain in the ass in most fights. Like Fatalis and Elatrian, mounting's not very good. It takes a long time to down both of those monsters from a mount. I would never mount in solo. Let me put it that way. Unless you're really, really struggling with a monster, I would never bother mounting. I would never bother trying to mount in solo unless you're fighting something like Sappy. Yeah, I guess if you're playing solo, you'd never really go for mounts at all. The problem with mounts, though, Burbanana, is that think about how long it takes you to drop. This is all from the mindset of how long does the hunt. This is all from the mindset of how much DPS are you doing, how long is the hunt doing. Mounting can certainly make the hunt more relaxing, but it doesn't speed up the hunt. Because it takes you so long to drop the monster that the amount of damage you can do while it's running around and you're stabbing it with the knife, the amount of damage you can do during that time exceeds the amount of damage you gain during the actual drop. During the topple. The one exception to that is Safi, because Safi instantly goes down on mounts. As soon as you jump up on Safi, as soon as you get the mount on Safi, you automatically get a mount finisher. So Safi is the one exception. If you're in a party, mounting certain monsters like Fatalis could be okay, but more downs helps with breaking parts, which matters when you're new and farming materials. Sure. I guess that's an argument. If you're new, still collecting materials, you can hit a particular zone, like a tail or a head, to get a horn break or a tail cut. I guess that's one good argument for mounting. But in terms of damage, and I don't need monster parts, so I don't mount. So if we're talking about what I'm doing, I don't mount because I don't need monster parts, and the damage is very poor. I think that's most of the stuff with Lance. I think. Oh. You can chain counter thrusts. If you get a successful counter, as in... Well, let me see if I can show it with the barrel. So, I was able to do 2 counters in a row. Because I actually successfully triggered and blocked an attack with my first counter. Alright, I'll show it one more time with the barrel. If you perform the counter, and you actually block something, which I didn't, then you can immediately perform a second counter. Here's a second counter. But if you don't block an attack, you can't perform 2 counters in a row. You have to perform another attack in between. So in multiplayer, this comes up more often in multiplayer, but it can also come, it can also happen in weird instances where the monster doesn't hit you. Like maybe they're attacking your palico, or the attack just passes over your head. So I'm just doing right trigger B, right trigger B. I get the double counter in a row. But it only works if the first counter blocks an attack. If I don't block an attack, and I do right trigger B, right trigger B, right trigger B, it just does the high thrust instead. It doesn't allow me to do the second counter. Because the first counter didn't actually guard or block anything. So again, this mostly happens either in multiplayer, or if the monster's using some weird attack that just passes over your head or doesn't hit you. You might know that you need to block 2 attacks in a row, but because the first one didn't hit, you no longer have the option of blocking the second one. So in that case, you would either want to guard dash, or you'd want to back hop for iframes, or you'd want to pray. Alright, I'm gonna go fill up my water. I'll be right back. If you have any questions about Lance, toss them in chat. Stay hydrated, chat. How do we enter Power Guard the quickest way? Right trigger BA. And because right trigger can draw your weapon, right trigger, you can draw your weapon immediately into guard. So it's really kind of the same thing. Right trigger BA. There's also one thing I forgot to mention, and I'm not sure I can show it here. Let me check. No, I can't show it. Maybe I can remove my levels of guard. Right trigger BA. I'm gonna see if I can remove my levels of guard here real quick to showcase something else. How much guard do I have now? I should have guard 0, hopefully. I still have guard 1. Where? Huh? I put on a piece of equipment that has guard on it, apparently. Actually, let's just do this. Did they make Power Guard as a cancel emergency guard? Kind of. I think that's the reason why the inputs are the way they are. Let's see if I can showcase what I want to show. So you see how I got pushed back there? Previously, against the barrel, I wasn't getting pushed back, right? That's because my level of guard has been dropped. And there's something called a guard reaction. So when I had 5 points of guard, my guard reaction was so small that it actually didn't show up properly. But you can see here how when the barrel hits me, I can actually enter power guard during that pushback, during that guard reaction. And you can use this to leaping thrust back into the fight if you need to, or turn around and change your direction. Hit behind me if the monster passed over top of me, right? I think there's some other cool things you can do. Can you still do double counter with less guard? Yes, but I'll try and show you what happens. Do you see how long it took for the counter to actually trigger? Because I took so much knockback. So you can do the counter twice in a row. But because I have low points of guard, or the knockback of the attack is high, it might be difficult. And as long as the monster's attacks are still hitting you, you can do as many of these counters in a row, provided each one actually blocks an attack. You can keep performing these counters. If any of them doesn't block an attack, then you have to do an attack in between. And then remember that during this counter attack, when you're actually using this attack, you are not blocking. So if a monster is using a multi-hit attack, you'll counter and hit the first of the multi-hit, but then you'll get knocked back on your ass from the second one. I think you can also dash attack from guard reaction. No, you can't. Yeah. You can also back hop out of guards. If for whatever reason you need to, you can back hop directly out of guard. So I'm actually holding right trigger as I'm pressing A to back hop. And as long as you have stamina. Oh, one last thing. One last thing is, notice how when I'm guarding, my stamina doesn't recuperate, right? My stamina is fixed, it's not going up. But if you waddle around while holding guard, you will regain stamina. If you move around slightly, you will regain stamina. You shuffle around very slowly like this, the turtle walk. Right, you shuffle around very slowly, but you do regain stamina during this. So, a moment where you might do this is against Kulvtaroth's Lava Breath. I don't know if you fought Kulvtaroth yet. Kulvtaroth's Lava Breath is kind of like the Fatalis Breath you've been seeing, where it hits many, many times. But the knockback on the Kulvtaroth Breath isn't very high, so you can actually waddle around during it and regain your stamina to allow you to continue blocking. If you stay put and you don't regain stamina, you will run out of stamina. There's not very many there's not very many instances where this mechanic is useful. There are not very many situations where that mechanic is actually helpful. One of them is, as I mentioned, the Kulvtaroth Fire Breath. That's the only one off the top of my head that I can think of where it's useful.